So whether you realize it or not, you're all probably very familiar with the idea of Aristotle's golden mean, right? Aristotle says that virtue is to be found in the middle between two extremes. Obviously, you guys probably aren't familiar with that quote exactly, at least most people, right? But in some form, this is one of those philosophical ideas that has diffused through all of society, right? The idea that the right answer is somewhere in the middle, the truth is somewhere in the middle, is an idea that's like so diffused into the way we think about things every day in the world that I don't even think most people would register the fact that it probably has a philosophical founder, right? Aristotle says this about virtue, and we all have come to say about truth. I feel like this is one of the first things you hear as a kid, right? You like punch a kid in the face at recess, and then he goes and he tells on you, and you both tell your side of the story, and then it's like, the teacher will be like, oh, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. There are both sides to every story, right? This idea of truth being something that is usually to be found in the middle. That is the exact aspect of this that I want to question here today, right? And I'm not going to do it by analyzing Aristotle's idea of the golden mean, because I think that, well, this is a nice jumping off point into this conversation, and I do think there's a value to be found in looking back at the origin of the way we think about many things. I don't think that's what defines this conversation anymore, right? I think that it's valuable to be like, oh, that's where this comes from, and the idea that there is some sort of genuine, thoughtful precedence for that, for, the truth being somewhere in the middle. But I don't think it's as applicable anymore, because I think this more has to do with, in the modern day, the way we look at it, and the way I'm going to look at it here for this video, is in regards to narrative, in regards to truth. It's no secret that we live in probably the largest time of misinformation ever, right? With that, you'll see a lot of people being like, well, you gotta look at all sides of every story, you gotta be like, the truth lies somewhere in the middle of all these, and that's usually what people say to do. There's a whole host of like new companies that are actually predicated on this premise of like Ground News is a big example. Like, we are going to show you news stories from all across the political spectrum because being in the middle is the right place to be, right? I don't know how I feel about this idea in general, because I have sort of in my mind, when I think about something like this, a hard time balancing the fact that it oftentimes ends up being true, and that there are also massive, giant, unignorable exceptions to this, right? I don't think if one person is, and this is one of the interesting things, this is why I do actually want to pull it away from Aristotle when we're discussing a topic like this, because like Aristotle was talking about this in a world where truth was very much simpler than it is now, Aristotle was living in a world where there wasn't as much fact out there, obviously. They didn't have as much science, right? So it was easier to be like, okay, old James over here says that the sun and the earth are around each other, or the sun goes around the earth, and then old, what was that guy's name? Galileo is like, the earth moves around the sun, and you would be like, I am going to look for a middle ground because I don't find that there is much scientific basing for any of this, right? This is the way that somebody would think about it back then. But then you have science come along, and then you realize like Galileo actually, like, he's looking at the reality, and we're fighting against another thing. That's how that works, right? So you kind of evolve, I feel like, from this spectrum of information where it's like, on the one hand, at the very beginning, you look at this angle of like, we just have two people saying things, we have two perspectives, we should analyze both of them as if they're valid. Then you get science coming along, and during the scientific revolution, obviously, they look at it as like, okay, natural history, science, this is what we're going to look at, that is the valid perspective, and we should move away from the other one. Nowadays, and this is why I think it's especially unapplicable to discuss Aristotle's idea of the golden mean in relation to truth, nowadays, I think it's even harder because we live in a post-truth world, right? This is something I feel like I talk about a lot on here, or maybe just recently I've talked about. This is not something I came up with at all. This is something that philosophers have diagnosed our modern society with, where instead of, we're back to a point where it's like everybody's just saying everything, and now it's like the way that misinformation works is rarely as nuanced or as complicated as it should be, right? Let's say that a news story happens where somebody in a city takes a car and they ram it into a sidewalk, right? And the reality of the situation is that they were looking at their phone and driving, right? The news story will rarely ever be that like, okay, there's the one side of this going, this guy was driving and then he accidentally lost control of his car because he was distracted. And then it's rare to see any sort of opposition to that narrative take it in a tasteful way and be like, well, I think he was distracted because of, the phones are beaming information or something like that. Maybe they come up with a conspiracy theory about how the phone's affecting him. It's never that, nuanced. Usually it's just, which not that would even be closer to reality, but I feel like disinformation isn't even operating in a way where there's a realistic basing anymore, right? There was a hurricane recently. I don't remember the name of it, but honestly, I don't think it really matters because this is happening a lot where there are these storms, and then a whole group of people is like, this is because of weather machines or because of airplanes dropping stuff, and that's just not based. There's nothing there. There is a whole host of nothing there, and when you're dealing with something like that, how do you, actually apply a sense of reasonability to it, right? I think one thing, the only way I think the golden mean could be applicable here, right? Because we're going to move off the assumption here that is based in science that global warming is what's causing all these extra storms, right? If you disagree, do Google that, take a look, ask ChatGPT maybe, but there's a lot of evidence for this, right? So let's move off this assumption for this video because that's the truth as far as science as it stands is considered, right? So this is the truth, right? There's all these other weird explanations that usually come along with a sense of denying the truth, but I think that the golden mean can be applied here in an interesting way, where it's like, okay, so there is a truth and there is just a whole other version of the truth, but that whole other version of the truth has to come off something, right? These people at least are analyzing that there is a hurricane that there wasn't before. There wouldn't, they gotta at some level recognize that there are more hurricanes right now than there were before, because they clearly they're making up a theory for a reason, right? So based off that, I think then you could kind of move this disinformation in another direction to be like, okay, wrong, but right idea, you see all these storms, maybe this is another thing. That would, I think, hypothetically work if the attitude around these storms didn't come from just not wanting to believe in climate change, right? Which is why this is even harder. And this is where I think, I don't know if I haven't really done enough. I really should do more reading on the idea of the post-truth whole world thing, right? Because I think it's something that is really relevant. We end up talking about a good amount here that I don't know enough about to really feel like I can speak on it confidently, and I don't like that. I want to. But there's obviously, I don't know if it started because of it, there's, I think, fairly intuitively a link between this new idea of a post-truth world and the internet, right? Because it's even harder now. There's disinformation on every single side, right? And truth, as it happens, is an objective thing. That's the meaning of the word. What is happening right now in X place is objective, right? Interpretations of why it's happening can be different, but when looking at events in front of us, they have to be objective. And when everybody's just making stuff up, you can't take 1% of what everybody's saying, right? I don't know, what common knowledge would tell us to do is if you're scrolling through Instagram and you see 20 different explanations as to why there's more hurricanes, put them all everywhere, and right there in the middle is the truth. But that's not the way information's working anymore. Usually there's one thing, right? So, how do you know that? You know what I mean? How do you actually use your senses to be this is the one thing? Because when there are 20 different things, and we've all done this, every single person who's on the internet has gone through this, right? They've been both a victim and villain of misinformation. They see something, they want to believe it, they jump to believing it, whether it's true or not. And how do we take that? Like, there's no objectivity in any of these things because you're getting them all presented to you in the same way. Like, if there's like a scientist on climate from Harvard on my feed telling me about these hurricanes, and then there's just some guy, not too dissimilar from myself, right? I'm doing that exact thing. I'm just some guy talking. We are put on the same playing field. We're put on the same level when one of us is clearly not. And nobody believes like the news anymore. Nobody believes these mainstream institutions. So what do you do about that when the idea, the common wisdom of the truth being in the middle no longer holds up because it's clearly not anymore, right? Reality is objective and there's just a billion different interpretations of it now. So you can't extrapolate the truth from the middle. You need to balance your sources somehow. Do you do it based off who's experts? Do you put in that, I guess is the answer just to put in the time and curate these sources of information that you consume to be reliable so you know? I mean, I think that's what we all do, right? I mean, that's what I do. I follow certain people. I know like, okay, this guy does this. This is a good person to listen to on this. That's how I do it. But then even what if my senses are flawed there, right? I guess in a way, all I'm really describing here is the actual user experience of how you get to a post-truth world though, right? I think the real answer is we probably need a much more, just a better way to disseminate information than social media and the news, or an overhaul of the news to happen, or the news is more stated in its perspective. Because I think that's one of these big problems, by the way, this is a whole side tangent, is like, we are supposed to be looking at all these stations if they have a veneer of objectivity, and we know they don't have that because we have proof everywhere, right? So like, that's kind of the issue with, I think, having the news operate as it does. Maybe they need to get more bias and explicitly state we are being biased here, or they need to get rid of all the bias altogether, and I don't know if that's ever going to happen. So I don't know. I guess in a way, I really came here to try and get an answer to like, can the truth be found in the middle? But I think that's kind of a ridiculous question at this point with the way information works. And I think that the real thing that actually just happened here was I just kind of described my experience of being a user and a consumer in this era where truth seems to be behind us in all regards. You know, I think we're like entering this phase where everything is so scattered and spread apart and crazy all the time. We've talked about this a lot. I think like the next phase needs to be, what do we take and keep going with? Because I don't think it can continue like this. I think it'll just get more chaotic if information keeps operating the way it does. But there's so much money to be made in it operating the way it does. So I really don't know. This episode just threw me for a loop, guys. Unironically, I paint and talked myself into a hole here. And I just like feel like I need to go like reflect or something. But this is the painting. What I'm doing here, by the way, should mention it, is I'm going to use a couple of the colors from the last color pouch. This was the last one we just did with the 2 greens and the pink, and then the 2 blues and the gray. Because I still have a little bit of paint from both of them left on this palette. And as you guys know, the show is not well funded enough for me to be able to just leave them behind. So I think 2 things can happen here. One, more realistically, I'm doing this because I need to use up these paints. I also think it's a nice test, though, of, I've done over 20 of these color block series so far. I want to see, am I able to, with my own skill, put together stuff on this palette into interesting color palettes? I think it'll be a nice test, but mainly because of the financial side of things. So this is the painting. I like it. I think this one works pretty well. I played it really safe, of course, but go check this out over on the Instagram. It'll be up later this week. And until next time, guys, gals, pals, my name is Max Dyke. This has been Paint Talk episode 100, 200, that's crazy to say, and 1. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.